Hi, everybody. Leticia here. Happy Thursday. Hope your week is going well so far. Greetings from beautiful and sunny Playa del Carmen. Well, I'm back at my virtual office here. And anyway, today, as announced, I want to talk to you about the process of buying a pre-construction property in Mexico. I know some of you may be wondering, why would anybody want to do that? Well, if you have had the pleasure of traveling to the beautiful Riviera Maya, in particular, you would have seen anytime in the past 10 years or so, you would have seen that there is a construction boom happening in this area. And definitely a lot of new construction, a lot of beautiful properties. And so I'm going to start with a few slides that I prepared. In fact, my lovely assistant helped to put them together. So I will share those with you, okay? Let me see how I go about that. Okay, we're going to share that and then... Okay, we're gonna see how I can actually get to the slides. Yeah, that was not very successful. Okay, you're gonna have to, there you go. All right. Okay, and I'm using a Mac because I'm having some technical issues with my laptop. Okay, there you go. So why would anybody wanna buy a pre-construction property? Well, when you buy in construction, you have first dibs when it comes to your preferred unit size, the unit location in the building. Typically, the higher floor units tend to go fastest. Obviously, if the units have ocean views, again, those tend to go the fastest, okay? The other thing is, when you buy in pre-construction, you are usually buying at a discount versus what that similar property would cost once it's finished. Not to mention that because of what I just mentioned, but if you were to wait until that property is finished, when it comes to the most desirable locations, properties, developers, you're going to be left with, I guess, the units nobody else wanted, and you're going to be paying full market price for them. So it does make sense in many cases to buy in the pre-construction stage. We're going to talk about, buyer beware, things like that. One of the other reasons it makes sense for many people to buy pre-construction, if you don't have all the money together to pay for a property in full, or maybe for whatever reason, maybe you would like to, but you don't qualify for financing, or you're not happy with the financing terms, or maybe it's not a priority that you necessarily have a cash flowing property right away, then buying in pre-construction, you have more time to come up with the money. And there are some developers that offer very advantageous payment schemes, such as even 30-70. So you put 30% down and the 70 would not be due until the completion of the property, which would be a year and a half, possibly even 2 years into the future. A more common payment scheme is 30-60-10. Meaning there's a 30% down payment required, then 60% would be paid in various chunks throughout the construction of the project, and then the final 10% would be paid on closing or upon delivery of the construction of the building. And I will distinguish between those two processes. In addition to that, some developers will even offer, I know of one developer that will offer even 50% interest-free financing for 3 years. And in my previous webinar, in which I talked about financing options for foreigners buying properties in Mexico, I also said that there are other developers, one that will even extend financing for up to 7 years. In that case, there is an interest rate being charged. But in any case, what this allows the potential buyer to do is it makes it easier to get into a property when you have these kinds of offers from developers, okay? What is typically the process here? So let's say you've identified a property that you like, and it works the same way with pretty much any developer I've come across. At the very least, you're going to be asked for a $1,000 deposit to hold the unit. And what that looks like is that in the inventory of that building, that unit usually gets turned yellow, meaning it is now reserved. More typical, you're going to be asked for $5,000 US refundable deposit. That deposit depends on the developer, but usually you have about a 14-day or 2-week period during which time you can change your mind, and it is completely refundable. And if I haven't had any developers that I've worked with where if the client said, you know what, for whatever reason I can't do this, where that deposit was not returned, okay? Sometimes it may take 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to get it back, depending on your banking and whether you're here in Playa or you went back to your home country. But the serious developers do return the deposit if things don't work out. Let's say that you've thought about it and everything makes sense and you do want to move forward with the purchase. So the next step in the process is that the buyer and the developer sign a contract called the promise to purchase agreement. Here in Spanish, it's called promesa de compra-venta or compra-y-venta. And this is done through a notary, okay? Notaries are, as I explained in some of my other videos, a notary is a lawyer that has at least 5 years of experience here in Mexico, and they have special licensing, special insurance, and only notaries, notarios or notarias, are the only ones allowed to legally transfer property titles, okay? So if you want the sale to be done properly, you want to go through a notary, okay? So this agreement for purchase and sale is usually done by the notaries. Now, depending on the developer, they already have the contracts drafted by the notaries and ready for you to sign. Sometimes, and then more often than not, the developer will already have the contract. Now you have a chance to review the contract. If there are any terms that you're not sure about or you're not in favor of, let's say you find like, well, the penalty for pulling out is too strong or what have you, there is some leeway. You as the buyer can negotiate. And so there is some back and forth in this process. They will usually provide you with a standard agreement, okay? And again, it's up to you. Now you can choose to get your own independent legal representation in addition to the notary that will be involved with the whole property purchase process. You can choose to pay a separate lawyer by the hour if you want to have an outside lawyer review your purchase agreement, okay? And it's not a bad idea to have an extra set of eyes, especially somebody like a lawyer, to give you, to say, yeah, you know what, this penalty is reasonable, because the contract will obligate both parties. And at the time of signing the contract, you as the buyer also pay the down payment. Now, the down payment typically is going to be 30% of the purchase price. There are a handful of developers that will allow a lower down payment amount, 20%, 10% is the absolute lowest I've seen. We actually, I'm lying. We actually had one developer, and I've spoken about them, Bali. It's a development here in Playa, where they sell beautiful family homes, okay? And what they will allow a buyer to do is, from the time of signing of the agreement, you can start making monthly payments up to 50% of the purchase price, and then the remainder of 50% will be due on delivery, okay? So, but more often than not, you're looking at 30% down, okay? And then you as a buyer agree to a payment schedule. The developer, the construction is then ongoing. You will typically be provided with photos, videos of the construction progress. And if you happen to be in the area, you're welcome to stop by the property site and see it for yourself, okay? Now, what happens at delivery time? So after the year and a half, let's say 2 years, depending on, at which stage in the pre-construction process you bought, the developer completes the construction. Once they're in the final stages of construction, the developer applies for something known as the condo regimen, or I don't know if that's the right word in English, but condo regimen. What this means, and this brings me back to the conversation about the escritura or property title, because in one of my earlier videos when we were talking about buying property in Mexico, we were talking about that you want to buy a property that has what's called an escritura or legal property title. Now, in the case of a pre-construction property, it works a little differently, because initially, all we have is a plot of land that the developer owns. And the job of the notary is to make sure that, yes, indeed, this developer is the rightful owner of this piece of land. They have an escritura for this piece of land. If there's a company involved, the job of the notary is also to check the developer's documents and say, well, okay, yes, these are the owners of this corporation. These are their pieces of ID and so on. So they check those details for you. Now, so initially we only have one plot of land, and the only way for that plot of land to be turned into individual property titles for each of the units is when the developer then applies with the municipality for the condo regimen. Okay, and this process in the past used to take no more than 90 days. Now, in COVID times, unfortunately, in some cases, it took a lot longer than that, 6 months, 9 months, even upwards of a year, which is kind of unfortunate, which means that for those property owners who bought at that time, they're kind of, they're stuck without their official property title. That being said, that doesn't mean they could not have possession of the unit. So the majority of developers will allow, they understand that there is a lag between the time the property is ready, it's moving ready, it's been delivered, and the time the government drags their feet to give you that piece of paper, okay? So essentially what happens is while we're waiting for the condo regime to get issued, the building may have already been delivered. The building is good to go. Now, some developers will allow buyers to take possession of the unit upon paying 90% of the purchase price. Some developers, especially the larger ones like Simcom and ESED, they will expect you to pay the property in full because they're like, well, we did our job. Listen, we completed the building, we applied for the condo regime, and right now it's not in our hands anymore. Now, the developers do have a strong interest in making sure that the condo regime gets issued. The reason being that for the buyers that buy and need that take mortgages, that need what here in Mexico is called crédito bancario or a mortgage, a lot of the mortgage providers will not issue the mortgage unless we have a property title, because really the mortgage will be issued on that individual condo unit. They can't issue or at the very least they want to know that the process of applying for the condo regime has at least been started. So depending on the lender. And in the case of those units that were sold on credit, the developer is like, oh, I really need this condo regime because I don't get paid from the mortgage company until they're able to issue the mortgage. Then the buyer is able to pay me in full, and deal is done. Okay, so they have as much of an interest as you as the buyer for this process to be completed. But sometimes, again, unfortunately, it is in the government's hands. I do find that, okay, now that things have definitely opened up here for a while, a lot of the government workers were working from home during COVID. Now that has changed and offices are open again and things are moving more closer to normal speed, okay? Now, once the regime is issued, the buyer now is able to proceed to the final closing procedure, which is in Spanish called the escrituración. The signing of the escritura, the property title, okay? And this is done at a notary's office. And again, I already mentioned to you how the notaries are the legal professionals that are allowed to legally transfer property title in Mexico. So at this point, the buyer is also has the responsibility of paying for the closing costs. And depending on where you may be in the world, different jurisdictions have different closing costs. Where I was living before in Canada, our closing costs were only 1% of the purchase price. Here in Quintana Roo, they are significantly higher. You're looking at 6 to 7%, and I did mention this in a previous video. However, on the plus side, and that includes about 50% of that is a land transfer tax. So 3% is a land transfer tax that the government charges. In other words, the government here, you could say they pre-charge you for the taxes. But the good news is after that is paid, once you become the owner, your annual property taxes are very inexpensive. We're talking, depending on the size of the property, anywhere from $100 to maybe $300 per year. Okay, I remember back in Canada, people are paying hundreds of dollars per month in property taxes. So, which way would you have it? Well, this is the way it is here. I heard in places like Florida, closing costs can be, 10%. So there's worse places when it comes to closing costs. But, I did want to remind people that is part of the buyer's responsibility. And then what ends up happening after the sale process, the developer will stay on as the common area administration company. That's when the owners form the condo board. Then they get to vote on perhaps another common areas maintenance company, and we have a variety of those companies in the area. Most developers provide a 1-year warranty on construction, and now a lot of the owners, at least here in Quintana Roo, many owners buy properties for rental purposes. So they may live in the unit part of the time. but then the rest of the time they would like to rent it out. It's an area that's very in demand, both for short-term and longer-term rentals. So some developers from the get-go have an agreement with a short-term rentals management company, and you are informed of that from the beginning. Hey, listen, we have this agreement in place with these guys. They're one of the top short-term rentals management companies, or the developer themselves, they may have a division that does short-term rentals administration. And more often than not, it is an optional agreement, but some projects do require you to commit to working at least for a certain period, usually a 3-year period, to work with that specific management company. All these things you will know from the get-go. And yeah, so once you have your unit, you can move in it. You can, if it's a building that offers what's called free administration, you can choose to self-manage the unit, or use agents, or use a combination of methods to advertise your unit for sale. Or if you want to make your life easier, you can hire a short-term rentals management company. They usually work on a percentage basis. At the lowest end, you can expect to pay 20% of gross rents. At the higher end, I've seen percentages as high as 35%. And of course, you as the owner can do your research and figure out, okay, does it make sense to pay a higher percentage? What else are those guys offering me that perhaps the 20% company is not, okay? I did want to maybe, as my contact info is on the screen, of course, feel free to reach out to me. That's my email address, info@freedomplaya.com. I can also be reached on Instagram or via WhatsApp. I did want to say, some closing thoughts, is there, and that's something perhaps I should have covered in this presentation, is there any risk involved with buying in pre-construction, and this applies, I think, in every part of the world, even where I was living before in Toronto, Canada. There is the occasional project that doesn't get completed, and there is a risk that a buyer could lose their money. The project may end up in limbo, not get completed. Needless to say, that risk is a lot lower when you're dealing with a developer that has a track record. And we have a number of developers here in the Riviera Maya that have a good track record of completed projects, okay? What are some of the other ways? Now, does it make sense to take a chance on a new developer? Again, this is really based on each individual client's risk tolerance. For example, the one developer that offered 50% financing, they had a very attractive price point, okay, it was their initial project in Playa. But prior to that, they had a 20-year history developing all kinds of commercial buildings and infrastructure projects for the Mexican government. Okay, it's a company based out of Ciudad de Mexico, Mexico City. And okay, but this was the first commercial offering in Playa del Carmen. So some clients may be like, well, but this is their first condo project. I don't know. So really, it's really up to the client's risk tolerance if they're willing to take a chance on a newer developer. A project I know of in Tulum, for example, it's a lady who again has a 20-year history in New York as a real estate investor developer. But yeah, this is her first project in the Riviera Maya. She is working with an experienced builder. So I suppose if you as a client really like a project, then yeah, it is a bit of an act of faith when buying pre-construction, more so than when you're buying a property that's already ready. I understand that. But that's why there are pluses and minuses. When you're buying a property that's already ready, you're paying the market price. Sometimes you can negotiate the price. With one thing I forgot to mention, with developers, the prices are pretty set. You could say, well, can I offer less than what they're asking? Typically, the prices take into account all their construction costs, everything else, the fact that they have to pay commissions to people like me, okay? So typically, the only negotiation involved in pre-construction is if you as a client are in a position to put down a larger down payment, most developers are able and happy to give you a bit of a discount off the price, okay? If you're able to pay 50% down instead of 20 or 30%, then for sure, you can negotiate a discount. Other than that, again, there are pluses and minuses, I think, with buying both pre-construction and buying what we know, what's called a resale unit. Perhaps one day I'll do a webinar about that, But in this webinar, I just wanted to cover really what the process is for, let me see how I can stop sharing. Yes, stop sharing. Okay, I think you can now see my face. I'm so lost, my gosh, using my assistant's Mac. Yeah, I have no idea. Uh-oh. Yeah, I may have to call her because I don't even know how to end my, oh Lord. Okay, there it is. There's Chrome. There it is. Oh my goodness, such a noob. Sorry about that. Okay, somebody's asking, do I prefer Tulum to purchase or replacing Playa del Carmen? I'm leaning more towards Tulum. Okay, yeah, that's a good question. I think it's a matter of preference. And you know what I think I'll do? Maybe for my next webinar, I will do, I'll share my thoughts on Playa versus Tulum, because that I think in itself is a topic worth addressing, but it wasn't the purpose of today's webinar. So I hope you don't mind, Dio. So that said, everyone, thank you for tuning in. Feel free to email me with any questions you may have, info@freedomplaya.com. And have a great rest of the day. Have a great rest of the week. I will see you next time. Okay. Blessings. Bye, everyone.